Today, I'm announcing that I started a Patreon. I'll be releasing a weekly podcast where I answer questions, and this video is a sample of that. First, I'm going to explain what the Patreon offers, and then I'm going to do a Q&A. There will also be a Discord exclusive to patrons. It'll primarily be a community hub for people who chose to support me to interact. I'll be in there occasionally, but mostly I won't be messaging much. I will, however, be doing announcements and community-specific events that will only be available to those in the Patreon. Things like maybe finding some way to incorporate collaboration in a future video. Something I want to make clear is that this Patreon is to support me as a creator, not just the channel Pay the Musician. I have a second channel called Pay where I do commentary and video essays, and I plan on making more channels in the future. Nothing crazy, but I want to do comedy sketches and I don't know, I just want to do all sorts of stuff. The link to the Patreon is in the description below, and now I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I'm offering with the Patreon. The podcast is going to be primarily in audio format, but I'm doing a video today to give a sample so you guys can generally know what to expect. I'll be releasing it weekly. That might change in the future, but for now, that's what I'm planning. It should run for 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes they'll be longer. Everything's a little bit subject to change to see how it plays out in my life, but I feel pretty good about being able to keep up with something like that. I've been considering making a Patreon for a while, but part of the reason I chose today to release it is because there was a specific user named Pyronix who left a comment asking me to make a Patreon because they wanted to support me. And I'm choosing to interpret that as a sign that this is the time to release a Patreon. I've been working on it for a while, but I'm excited. Part of the reason a Patreon is important for me as a creator is because you may not know this, but I work for other content creators as a video editor primarily. In fact, this channel has only made $1,600 in the last year off of 1.8 million views. So I'd like to make this a more viable part of my career path. I like editing for other content creators and I don't plan on stopping, but if I could make more money from content, it would be more viable for me to eventually move down to Southern California, which is something I've been meaning to do for a while because it'll give me more opportunity to collaborate with many other people in the area. I'd like to take the time now to concisely put together all the things I'm offering on Patreon at this moment. Number 1, the podcast that I release weekly where I answer questions from patrons. Number 2, the Patreon exclusive Discord that will host events and create a community hub. Number 3, I'll be releasing the isolated vocals and instrumentals of some of my music. And number 4, finally, some behind the scenes footage. I don't plan on doing that often, but it is something I'd like to share more. I just don't know the process of creating that, but that's where it would go when I make it. For example, what I do with my phone is whenever I have an idea, I'll record it, whether or not it's an instrumental part or lyrics or a standout phrase or a melody. So I have a lot of different voice recorder files from different songs I've written throughout the years. Maybe I'll release some of that. Right now, the isolated vocals and instrumentals are out for both of my recent Elden Ring songs I made for Atrioc. And there will also be a second podcast episode up and available today if you go sign up for Patreon now or after you're done listening to the podcast. Let's get to the questions. Question number 1 comes from a new friend of mine named Swole and an old friend of mine named Tom Videoger. They both asked about my name. What is Pay short for? Where did it come from? It's actually short for my full name. Pay is my first name and my last name is The Musician. It's a little known fact. Another one of my friends, Forgiven, asked what my favorite color is. It's blue. Now this is really important because while not all people who know my favorite color is blue is a friend of mine, all of my friends do know my favorite color is blue. Shaymander, sorry if I mispronounced that, asked what my favorite song is. And normally that would be a hard question for me to answer, but recently I've really loved Just the Two of Us by Bill Withers. I think it's a perfect example of a song that, if you look at the individual components, there's a disconnect between the sum of the parts and the value of the whole. It's just so good. PFC_stupid asked, when did you discover your musical talents? I don't like thinking of my ability to play music as a talent. I think of it more as a skill I've worked very hard to develop. Generally speaking, almost every talented singer I've met or every talented musician has put a huge amount of work into learning how to play the instrument. And while I am lucky to find a lot of joy in the process of making music, I don't think that it's anything that came innately to me. An example being recently I tried to learn cello for the first time, and in music a lot of skills transfer. If you're playing a fretted instrument like a guitar, it's much easier to learn the bass, even though there's some new techniques you'll have to learn. But with the cello, I was confident that I'd be able to learn it quickly. However, it's a bowed instrument with no frets, and that made it incredibly challenging, and it's easy to forget how bad I was at all of these instruments when I first picked them up, but it was a nice reminder. Justin asks, did you start music on YouTube or somewhere else? Ironically enough, I kind of did. My first exposure to music was flute in band all the way through 7th to 8th grade. And in 7th grade, I decided I wanted to learn piano. So I started teaching myself using online resources. One of the benefits of growing up with YouTube. I always kind of thought about potentially trying to be a musician, but that was balanced with 90 other dreams. Eventually, though, leading into my sophomore year of college before I studied abroad, I realized this was something that was important to me, and I started making a really conscious effort to learn. But where things really changed was in my junior year of college when I joined my songwriting club at my university. And that was really big for me. I started writing songs weekly, I started putting a lot of concerted effort into it, and I started really producing. Quirks asks what my process is for writing music. This is a really good question that it's hard to completely cover, and it might be something I come back to in my second episode today. But really what I do is I start with the music, almost always. I'll have like a guitar part or a bass part when I'm like fiddling around, when I'm working with it, that like stands out to me like, oh, that's cool. This is something that I like the sound of. And then I'll maybe record that or just keep it in mind. I almost always try to like save stuff because it's very easy to forget. And then I'll mess around with lyrics. I'll just improvise over it. And then I'll find a line that stands out to me and build a story around it and then build it step by step from there. Sometimes more recently, the songwriting process also involves Ableton. I'll like literally lay out multiple tracks, or I'll do different things. I'll try some stuff out. I'll even get halfway done with the song and realize, okay, I want to go somewhere completely different with this. In the most recent song I made for Atriox's Elden Ring playthrough, I was like, I'd like to go somewhere completely different. What if I tried reversing the guitar and cropping it up to make a different chord progression and record a new bass part? Or something along those lines. And then I ended up doing exactly that. My process is always kind of different, but it generally relies on, first of all, creating a story in my head that I can write a song for. That makes writing lyrics a little bit easier. And also just finding a cool instrumental part to begin with and then building layers around that. Sorkara asks, would you ever consider doing some kind of behind the scenes video of the process for a track, or maybe as part of the potential Atriox album? That would be pretty cool. Yeah, I've actually done a video in the past. I wrote a song in an entire hour and have the entire process documented in, like 20-minute long video. It was really fun to do. I am very interested in content like that, whether or not it's coming back retroactively and just showing you the project, like, okay, how did I make Blood on My Hands? Or how did I make Story of a Samurai? What did the individual parts sound like? Very interested in making stuff like that. However, I'm not sure there's enough of a demand right now in viewership. Not to say that there aren't some people who are very passionately interested in doing that. I just need to factor in kind of my entire audience when making content like that. It's also very time consuming. It's like a difficult process to make a video like that, especially if you're trying to write a song and documenting the process as you do it. But yes, I do plan on doing that. I'm happy to do more of that in the future. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. Tyler asks, do you find it easier to write songs for stream rather than the more serious original music you make? Is the process for making them any different? Yes. I think when I make music that's funny, I have much more wiggle room with the production. Also, there's this thing that artists say that making art is like a very vulnerable process, and they can be very melodramatic about it, but it is to a certain degree. A little bit, you're putting your heart out there. You're putting, something that's important to you or makes you feel strongly about something. There are often things that resonate with you or something that you're sensitive about. And when making music about a streamer or a stream, there's a lot of material to work with. There's a lot of running bits, jokes, there's references you can make. You can also just create a story, or you don't have to create a story because there's already one there. There's a narrative. So yeah, I think that it's easier to make music for streams, and sometimes not so much because you are under a time crunch. You have expectations. When I was commissioned by Atriox a couple of times, it's difficult to make music in a short period of time. Not to say that I can't do it. It's just that when you get into the flow state, you're much more productive, but that's not something you can force. You kind of just need to sit down every day and work. So while I can make one song incredibly fast, to be able to do that under a time crunch is a completely different skill that I've been working on developing. Brian asks, how did you get into making this sick music? Did you go to university for a bit or just started as a kid? Was someone in your family a musician? And what's your favorite non-English musical artist if you have one? Good question. I know all of these are good questions. Thank you guys. Everyone who asked a question, these are awesome. Lots of material to work with. But okay, lots of things to cover there. How did I get into making music? For me, something I didn't say before when I was talking about the process, the timeline of making stuff, I'm a very emotional person. I get sad a lot. And in high school and college and different parts of my life have had to deal with like feeling very depressed. Now, one of the things that's really helped me as a person is finding healthy ways to cope with those emotions, to engage with them that aren't destructive, but rather allow me to feel those emotions, feel validated within that experience, and then let them pass. So for me, sad music, sad movies, everything in between has been really crucial help. And a lot of songwriting has come from that place. It's like, okay, I'm feeling an emotion. I want to sit with that emotion, experience it, especially when they're more difficult emotions to experience, and find a healthy way of dealing with those that'll help me move within that emotion rather than like denying it or engaging in like an unhealthy kind of like unproductive thing that, ends up hurting me in the long run. It's therapeutic, which is what a lot of people say. It hasn't served that purpose so much anymore in life, but especially when I was younger, especially when I was starting, it was a really, really therapeutic process. The next part of the question is, did I go to university? I studied sociology at UC Berkeley. I didn't want to go to school for music because I really hated school. I did not have a good relationship with school. I'm very, very happy that I finished and graduated with a degree. I went through community college before transferring into university. So I graduated with almost no debt. I got financial aid because my family was so low income that I got a lot of support from the state. I had the option to get a degree for very cheap, which not a lot of people have that opportunity. I also worked as a preschool teacher throughout college, which helped me kind of prevent student debt and avoid that. I'm really glad I studied something that wasn't music. I think that there's so many online resources to better yourself as a musician that you don't really need to go to school for it. But that being said, external forces, like things that hold you accountable, are very valuable. As someone who struggled a lot with school, I think what's more important than going like, I don't want to be in school or I do want to be in school, is finding the best system that works for you. And if you want to be an artist, if you want to be a musician, if you want to do something, I think that generally speaking, you're going to have to do that while working or while in school. Because, even now after getting a degree from like a prestigious university, I still... it's still difficult. It's all a lot. And, I feel like I'm kicking butt and really proud of where I am on YouTube and as an artist and the skills I've developed, but I'm still pretty noticeably far away from having a sustainable, reliable, lasting career in the industry. The next part of the question was asking if I started as a kid or if someone in my family was a musician. Yeah, I played a little bit of music as a kid. I had elementary school band, and my mom at one point knew piano and was teaching way back in the day, but she wasn't really well versed, and she helped me a little bit, but not much. Mostly I used online resources, and everyone else in my family is very not musically inclined. They were always like, whoa, music, whoa. And finally, what is my favorite non-English music artist? I don't think I have a specific artist that comes to mind, but there's two things that come up. The first is, I remember going through a little phase with my brother when I was in like high school or a teenager where he listened a lot to French rap. And it's very interesting how there's this whole little unique ecosystem in like the French rap scene. I think that also applies to like UK rap a little bit. And then the other thing that comes to mind is I really love anime. Anime is something I really enjoy consuming. I really enjoy it as a medium. There's lots of problems with it, but then there's tons of really cool parts too. And anime OSTs are really, really sick. There's kind of this thriving rock scene in Japan that the United States has kind of moved past. And so we kind of see this cool, innovative music coming out of a lot of Japanese artists. That's this cool, like classic, I don't know, like 4-piece rock band. And that's sick. That's really cool. So those are the people that come to mind first. Isaac asks, how long does it take you to write a song? What is your thought process when doing so? How do the answers to these questions differ between arrangements and original tracks? I assume when you're saying arrangements and original tracks, you're talking about like orchestral kind of composition versus like a song where I'm singing in it with lyrics. Yeah, okay. How long it takes me to write a song varies a lot. Sometimes it can be super productive in a couple days and get most of it done. Generally speaking, the first like 60 to 70% of a song I can do in like 2 days, or it can take me a couple weeks or longer. It varies. A lot of that depends on inspiration. However, the last like 35% of the song kind of pretty consistently takes a couple of days. Polishing, adding instrumentation, I've kind of narrowed the process down a lot. I've learned how to make things more convenient so it's easier to create. One of my songs on Spotify I released in completely recorded the entire process in an hour and spent another hour and a half mixing it. So sometimes I can make music very quickly, but that is not always the case. Now, as far as my thought process, the main thing I would like to drill again is that creating a story is a very important part for me, no matter what, whether or not it's there's a voice and lyrics or not. When you have lyrics, you can express so much. You can get so much across. When you're working with just instruments, it's easy to capture big emotions and it's harder to capture nuanced emotions. Generally speaking, I'm never creating orchestral music that isn't accompanied by some sort of visual aid, right? There's some story being told that you're paying attention to. I scored a movie back in like 2020. It was like this low budget indie film that didn't turn out very well, but it was a really cool process to have the visuals to work with. So in those scenarios, it's all about complementing what the story is trying to portray. It was like that a little bit with the arrangement I did for Atriox thing. Mostly that was just filling time because they had that timer that they needed an instrumental for. Leo asked a question that is kind of bringing up some concepts that I was talking about before, saying, do you often find yourself drawing inspiration from something specific when you start writing a new song, or do you prefer to start with a totally blank canvas? Yeah, I sometimes I come in with a specific thing in mind, and sometimes I'll come in completely blank with no intention of writing something specific, and I kind of discover it along the way. Generally speaking, I like having some sort of musical base to start off with, something that I think is really cool, that I can spend time like developing, a cool guitar part. It's a really satisfying process to start completely blank and discover something, stumble upon and accidentally create something really cool. It's also awesome to come into a project with a specific thing in mind and then be able to do it. I find that starting on a blank canvas is significantly easier to do than the vice versa, because expectations are always hard to meet and there's more at stake, like you care more about it being good when it needs to be this specific thing or it needs to capture this specific moment. Charlie Blue asks, where do you get the inspiration for the lyrics of your songs, including the ones like Here Comes the Boy or other TikTok songs? The TikTok songs are actually kind of hard because you need to take something that's this repetitive, like 10-second loop, and you need to make a fully established song out of it. You also have to work within restrictions. For Here Comes the Boy, it was a really difficult process. Actually, it was like, oh, I can make a longer version if we break this like threshold. And by the time, I came back and saw that I had broken it, it was like, I don't know where to go with this. This is an incredibly difficult thing to write a song about. With Jazz Frog, that was a really easy process. I loved the idea of having this like little friend that's like a jazz frog. This actually incorporates another question I was asked by Luke Ari that asked like what was my favorite cartoon as a kid. I was going to say Phineas and Ferb or Avatar: The Last Airbender, but recently I really love Over the Garden Wall. And with Jazz Frog, I had this like this vibe, this feeling, the emotions, the themes of Over the Garden Wall in mind when creating something like that, except a little bit more adventure timey, a little bit less dark. Happy Hope asks, specifically referring to the 2 Elden Ring songs, were they made from scratch, or did you already have some groundwork that you pivoted into these songs because they matched the themes already in mind? Those songs were both made from scratch. I do have some chord progressions I lean towards. There are just different progressions that I'll change keys in and utilize a lot. So with Story of a Samurai, that's a progression that I commonly use a lot. But no, they were mostly just made from scratch. My goal was primarily to make Atriox feel like he was in a movie. The first song, I was just kind of winging it. I was like, hey, this won't take too long. This would be fun. I think it'd be cool to do. I used to do a lot of Atriox music, and then a lot of stuff got busy and I didn't do it as much. But yeah, I just wanted to match the theme. It's a dark game with really cool hype moments. I think Atriox has a very strong personality that a lot of his viewers, including me, really appreciate. So it was kind of fun to take those ideas, those themes, and make a song about it. And specifically, the Story of a Samurai was it's very like alt indie, but it was meant to be a little bit like a bard telling a story, kind of in like the theme of like toss a coin to your witcher, along the lines of like, okay, this is like a cool thing that makes you feel hype and cool while you're doing it. So I'm very proud of that song, and I'm very proud actually of the more recent song, Blood on My Hands, because that one I put a lot more effort into, and it might not come across, but I was doing a lot of things that I'd never really done before, and that's a very time-consuming process to learn new skills and try to incorporate them. But it's really cool because the way I approached making music as a whole was start simple, right? Just like have a simple chord progression, have simple instrumentation, make the bass really, really good, because we live in this digital age where it's significantly easier to just add as many tracks as you want, as many sounds as you want. And I think people overutilize stuff. And they end up with 50 tracks that are all kind of uninteresting to try to create one sound when you could do that with one well-developed synth or one cool guitar part. So I tried to stay simple, and I am still kind of growing out of that. I feel like I've developed the core enough now to where I can start trying some weird production things. And it was a really cool, engaging process to make those songs. And it was even cooler to witness them play out with so much magnitude. There's something about observation that increases like the impact of a moment. So that first song when he was fighting those two bosses, that he just grinded that entire night. I was just there most of it, just watching. And I'm not a big stream watcher. I'll check in, I'll watch for maybe an hour, but I was there for like 4 hours in a row watching him grind this boss. So when he finally won, it was a really cool moment. It was a moment that stood out to me, something that as I was experiencing, I was like, this is fucking dope. This is special. This is really cool. Lord Carrot Games asked, did you try any other types of music before settling on your current style? Yeah, absolutely. I think I still am trying many different types of music. One of my first series I was trying to make on YouTube was specifically one called Searching for a Sound, where I was like, oh, it would be cool if I just tried to write a song every week of a different genre and just see if I could do it, see if I could make something like that. I made a couple episodes before moving on, getting busy again with school, and it was a good practice run for like, okay, I bought a camera, I'm trying to learn how to use it, actually edit stuff together and finish a product. Yeah, I think I'm still figuring out exactly what my style is. I also don't think I want it to stagnate too much. I think a lot of musicians can find a sound and then just like always sit in it. But, those people aren't bad. I'd like to do a lot of different stuff. What I had in mind for this podcast wasn't just answering questions. This has actually been very dense, and I felt the need to answer a lot of these questions because there's a lot of really great questions that people asked. But I also want a section of it just to be kind of exploring thoughts or exploring interesting ideas. One of those things that I wanted to explore today was just kind of sharing what's going through my head about starting a Patreon. I haven't really been making very much money off of YouTube. And when I used to watch YouTubers and see people around my size now, they fell into the category of like they were above the line. Like there's YouTubers, there's small YouTubers, and there's big YouTubers, right? And small YouTubers is like, oh yeah, if you're getting, if you've gotten like coming up on 2 million views like that, yeah, that's awesome, good job. But with the content I make, the way revenue on YouTube works is it's dependent on multiple factors: what type of channel you are, what type of content it is, how ad friendly it is, how long it is, whether or not you put mid-rolls. After 8 minutes, you get access to mid-rolls. A lot of those components are like stuff I'm trying to like figure out, and it's just it's not taking me longer than I expected. I was just caught off guard by like getting to this point and making so little money. So with the Patreon, it's been something I've been thinking about doing for a while, but before, it's a really difficult process. And I imagine a lot of people during COVID have been experienced this, but to separate like your workspace and your living space is really hard. And as someone who is working at home and creating at home constantly, it was hard to consistently be productive, especially since I am working as a video editor. I'm also doing other stuff. So I was nervous about the expectations of creating a Patreon. And something I wanted to make really clear in this episode, and I'm going to go back and edit this in. I actually forgot to do this, but I'm going to go back and edit this in, is that this Patreon isn't to support me, Pay the Musician on YouTube. It's to support Pay, the content creator behind Pay the Musician, and my second channel, that's a video essay channel, Pay, and other channels I want to make in the future that does comedy sketches and maybe does, I don't know, cool IRL content with content creators. It's not something I really feel passionately about and want to deep dive in, and I know so many people who do, who I've worked with. But I do think it's something that'd be cool. I have some ideas for content, and I'm slowly making more and more connections with a lot of people out there who have audiences and who are really cool people. So the Patreon is just a means of, there's a certain law, like if you don't ask, you'll never know the answer, right? So what I realized is to start the Patreon had less to do with like, okay, will it do well or will it perform well, which I'm still completely unsure of what to expect, but more along the lines of like, okay, can I make a Patreon worth it for people to subscribe? Can I make something that offers a couple things that people might like? And a lot of the inspiration came from a podcast I used to listen to. I don't really listen to much anymore, called The Yard by Ludwig and his roommates. And they had a really great Patreon. And for a while I was a supporter before I had some conflict with Slime, and it just kind of ruined it all for me. But their model was really solid. The way podcasts work, by being able to just do a whole second episode, I thought that was really cool. And I like the exclusive Discord for Patreon members. I thought that was really cool, and being able to like host events available only for patrons. I thought that was like a good balance where it's like not so excessively difficult to make the content for Patreon consistently, because that's what I need to do, completely independent of how many people actually end up choosing to support me on Patreon. I need to be able to make the content for it, because then you don't really need to worry about expectations. It doesn't matter if 2 of you choose to support me, or no one chooses to support me, or millions of people choose to support me, because I'm planning on just doing this podcast anyways, because why not? This is something I enjoy doing. I enjoy talking about things. And I think it's a cool way of like interacting with an audience without making kind of this parasocial. One of my other problems with Patreon is a lot of it's like, let's hop in a call and let's interact directly. And recently I kind of had like my first a little bit like creepy experience with a viewer. And I was like, oh gosh, this is scary. Like I want, encourage my audience to be aware of like, it's cool that you relate to my art. It's cool that you relate to all these things. It's cool that, I'd like to be a pretty authentic person presenting myself in that way. But, it's also important to remember that like I'm just a person on a screen, and I love that what I'm making resonates with you, but it's more important that what I'm making resonates with you than it is that like you're attached to me as an individual. I don't know. I think that there's certain aspects of fame that really creep me out and make me uncomfortable. And there's certain aspects of like how parasocial some relationships get with content creators that I want to do everything within my means now to kind of counteract that, because I want to make content, and there's a certain necessity to exposure that comes with making content. And there's specific content I want to make. Yeah, I think that overall I'm very excited to be releasing this. And I kind of just rambled for a little bit, but if you're still here, I really appreciate it, because I'm excited about this. So on Patreon, I have 4 tiers. I have specifically 3 that I in mind, like $5, $10, and $25. Just basically, they all give you this. But with the more expensive tiers, you'd be supporting me more, and you get a fancy little role in Discord. I wanted most of the content to be accessible at the lowest tier. And then I was talking to my brother the other day, and he talked about how it might be worth throwing in like a $2 tier or a $3 tier, just for anyone that's like kind of on the fence about doing $5 but wanting to support me. For a while, I'm just going to try that, like have like a discounted tier. Please use that if you need it. And if you don't, you can't support me, also no worries. Like, this is not an expectation. I really don't want people in positions where they can't support people to feel guilty about not being able to support me. I think it's really important that those who have the means and want to do it should be able to do it. So that's why I'm creating it. It's just a bit tangential, and I'm a little bit worried about dropping this, because it's kind of like starting a Kickstarter and like wondering if you're going to meet the funding. Now's the time. So if you enjoyed this, I'm going to be releasing a second episode where I'll be reading more of the questions. I probably won't get to all of them, so I didn't read yours. Don't subscribe on the off chance that I'll get to yours. But thank you everyone who watched. My link to my Patreon will be down in the comment section and also in the description. So thank you everybody for watching. Bye.